Hi, this is the second part of my first video for the Conservative Policy News blog. My name is Jason and I created CPN, and I'm also the principal writer. At the end of the first part we were talking about European Union and British integration into the European Union, and we had talked about a book, which I have here, called The Great Deception, written basically about the history of British integration into the European Union. Now in this book, Booker and North tell a complex story about the history of British integration into the EU, and they show that getting the British to surrender their sovereignty and their democracy and their constitution, the oldest on the planet, in the name of European integration, was eventually achieved through a serpentine effort that utilized a series of half-truths, denials, outright lies, and a number of unpopular measures enacted during financial crises, and the strategic purgation or calumniation of inconvenient politicians who were not supportive of the European project. What many are now realizing in Britain, and as Booker wrote, is that the so-called benefits of integration promised repeatedly by the pro-European elite never materialized, and at least for the British, brought about instead a disturbing rift between the British elite and the British public, the effects of which have not subsided and are growing even today. If you look at a lot of the news coming out of Britain, I think this is clear. What is most evident, though, is that the British are drowning in political correctness, as the political and media elites have become quite brazen about using harsh language to denigrate opponents of the European progressive project. A sure sign of authoritarianism, if there ever was one. Booker noticed this trend in The Great Deception, and he wrote, "One of the hardest things for future historians to reconstruct about British attitudes to Europe in the late 1980s and early 1990s will be the peculiar psychological pressure which had by now built up to make the benefits of Britain's membership of the community an article of faith, which no rational person could question. In the worlds of politics, the media, and big business, acceptance of Europe had become an unchallenged orthodoxy. Although to a degree this had been deliberately engineered by the skillful use of keywords and phrases, the mindset it engendered became largely unconscious. One of its most successful tricks had been to make the word Europe itself synonymous with the form of government taking shape just at one end of it, so that any distrust of the political Europe could be portrayed as xenophobic hostility to everything stood for by the wider geographical Europe with all its diverse people and cultures. To support the project was thus to be seen as pro-European, implying that this meant outward-looking, positive, internationalist, progressive, on the side of the future. And any anti-European could be labeled as inward-looking, negative, narrowly nationalistic, fearful of change, belonging to the past. The EU sympathizers described themselves as Europhiles, which sounded upbeat and pleasant. Those opposing it were condemned as Europhobes, conveying that they were consumed with negativity. From within the pro-European bubble, even the most rational doubts directed at the project condemned the doubter as hysterical, embittered, fanatical, and swivel-eyed. It is this pretty simple narrative, the progressive forces of light versus the conservative forces of darkness, that is being used by the progressive elite in the United States today. And believe me, it is a narrative that was developed in the laboratories of political linguistics and has been field tested by men and women in white coats and is feverishly updated according to the situation by researchers and writers in the well-financed think tanks in Washington. It is a language crafted to garner short-term support for massive transformational political projects, Thus, it is heavy on simple moralisms and the language of smear. The idea is to neutralize the opposition long enough to get a radical plan enacted into law and then hope that once it is implemented it will become impossible to repeal. That is how it was done in the name of the European project in Britain in the 1990s, and that is what is being done in the healthcare reform project today in the United States, and what will be tried with domestic cap and trade legislation very soon. For Britain, it is already too late. But hopefully, the U.S. will turn back the tide of the globalist progressive project this year, and Americans will have been awakened to the nature of the global progressive project itself. But the most important thing to keep in mind about the global progressives is that they are not going away anytime soon. Like the EU integration project, despite numerous electoral defeats, since European elites wanted a supranational, undemocratic government, they got it. This is why I believe it is of the utmost necessity to use the new media to create a popular conservative counterculture, one that will be powerful enough to endure any electoral defeats in the future. It must become unabashedly political and holistic, dedicating itself to fighting the left everywhere, and maybe even begin to create semi-autonomous zones, that is, geographical spaces intentionally developed to be immune from liberal left policy and the progressive cultural zeitgeist. Yes, it really is that bad. Since the left maintains control of academia, the legal profession, the media, and many parts of government in the United States, it is essential that we never tire of what amounts to a massive campaign of subverting the liberal elite, since the left is perpetually engaged in the suppression of conservatism and conservative ideas inside the institutions under their control. It is imperative that conservatives begin to reject those institutions and design long-range plans that reconquista. There are enough independent conservative voices, especially on the internet, but also evidenced by the proliferation of magazine and books, even Kindle, that will help us turn around liberal left hegemony, but nothing is won without a fight. And unfortunately, many Americans remain oblivious to the extent that leftist thought has already infiltrated their society. Counter-revolutions have been successful throughout history. And from its inception, conservatism has been primarily a counter-revolutionary movement. We need to revive this idea and assert proudly that we are counter-revolutionary, and that with every fiber of our being, we dissent from the progressive project. I hope my blog continues to be useful in that regard. Until later, thanks for watching, and goodbye.